Three, two, one. Hey everybody, you're listening to the Alec Lacasse Show. It's where I interview experts in everything from wood carving to business in order to dissect their daily practices, routines, and mindsets. Today I'm joined by the great Dave Stetson. He is an influential carver and alongside of Steve Prescott co-founded the Caricature Carvers of America. He has served on the Caricature Carvers of America team or board as the vice president in 90 to 91 and as president in 92 to 93. And I'm sure Dave can fill us more in on his involvement currently. But he is a full-time woodcarver and instructor of a brand of carving known as exaggerated realism. And you can learn more about Dave and his many awards, accomplishments, and credentials at the website caricaturecarversofamerica.org, which is www.cca/carvers.org/bio -pages /Stetson. /Stetson. So Dave, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, buddy.
How are we doing today?
Doing good. Doing good.
Beautiful.
A little cool this morning, but
Yes, it is.
we've been in the 80s for the last week, and now it's all of a sudden dropped down to the 60s. So
you're in Phoenix.
I'm in Phoenix, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so we're over here, clapping our hands and rejoicing at 60 degrees, and you're probably chilly. You're wearing a flannel.
I've got my flannel shirt on, buddy. It's cold out. Cold to me.
Yeah. Well, beautiful. So to start, I would love to find out a little bit more about the Caricature Carvers of America from you, kind of how it was birthed and what all went into the development of it. And but more importantly, first, I kind of want to ask you how you were introduced to carving and what it was that, maybe, or who it was that inspired you to try it.
Oh, golly. So about, I don't even know what year it was, but it was in the early 80s, I'm going to say. Was walking through a mall with, and came across a wood carving show. Didn't even know about a wood carving show. I was hoping to see a car show because they would have those in the malls also. But the wood carvers were set up with their carvings on the tables, and I walked by this table, and this guy had these little caricature cowboys on his table, and I looked at those, and I thought, wow, those are kind of cool. Wonder if I could do that, because I've always kind of been what you call artsy-fartsy. I did a lot of in junior college. I've got really heavily involved in art classes. In fact, art being ceramics, doing pottery. I was the TA or teacher's assistant. So I would fire up the kiln and put stuff in there that wasn't ready to go in, and it would blow up, and and I would salvage what I could, and I would take other students' projects and reconstitute the clay, and so I got free materials and spent a lot of time with photography back then. In fact, my lab partner was Nick Nolte. I had to share the enlarger in the dark room with Nick. He was
Wow.
Then. Yeah, he was just as strange then as he is now, but it was interesting. But so did a lot of art stuff back then. Was primarily playing with a new medium at the time. This was in 65, 66.
Hmm.
1965, 1966. Uh, Liquitex had come out with a new product they called acrylic paint. And it was like liquid plastic, and you could put it on anything. I could paint on windows and peel it off and make decals for the car windows. So I had these little peace signs that I was doing for everybody and peeling them off and sticking them on their windows. And you could paint on sidewalks, and it would last through the rain, and it'd be there a year after you put it out there. And it was just this miracle product, and you had all these different kinds of mediums you could mix with it. So it would, that was my kind of my artistic background. Never really any formal training beyond some basic design classes and the ceramics class, of course, and photography. But it all kind of goes together. And then I saw these carvings, and I was working for a printing company, working nights. I was the night shift guy because they gave us a premium for working nights, and that was a little more money, and that's what it was all about back in the day.
Right.
But yeah, we saw those things, and my kids were watching TV during the day while I was trying to sleep. And it became painfully aware to me that they were just kind of wasting their summers away in front of the TV set. And I wanted to challenge them to kind of somehow keep them prepared mentally when school started back up. So I would get up. I'd sleep for a couple hours, and I'd get up and load them into the car, and I'd take them to the library. And I'd say, we're going to go to the library. What are we going to do there? Well, I don't care what you do. You do whatever you want, but we're going to be there for 2 or 3 hours. And, well, I don't want to do that. Well, I did it anyway. And then it got to where I had a hard time getting them back in the car to bring them home. They got to like the library so much.
Totally.
But while they're off doing their thing, I went into the art area, the art books, and I looked for books on wood carving because I'd seen that little caricature of a cowboy.
Right.
And found a book. The name of the author escapes me at the moment, but he had a figure in there called Cowpoke Charlie. And so I followed the instructions for that, where you glue 3 pieces of 3/4 inch wood together to get, a 2.5 inch block, and copy the pattern for Cowpoke Charlie and cut it out with a coping saw. Went to the hobby store and bought an X-Acto knife. It was it was actually touted as a wood carving knife. It was a little red handle with a aluminum thing that would latch down hold the blade.
Yep.
The nice thing about those is when the blades got dull or broke, usually break them before they went dull, but when that happened, you just go buy some more blades, and I remember you get a whole pack, like 4 or 5 came in a box of this. I think it was a number 25 blade. Mm-hmm. And you get 4 or 5 of those blades in a box, and you're good to go. So I'd buy out the hobby store everything they had, and carve away. And I got hooked. Started doing some signage for people. There was a gal whose son played Pop Warner football with my kid, and she owned a store called the Incredible Gift Basket in Scottsdale. And her dad owned Lulabelle's restaurant, and they wanted some signage for their restaurants and stuff. So I carved up these signs for them that were, pierced relief carvings, basically. And that was the beginning of the commercial end of things as far as that goes. But that never really took off and went very far. I had an uncle who was visiting with my parents. He was from New York, had gotten sick, and the doctor prescribed a drier climate for him to get over whatever it was he was having a problem with. And he was the typical boisterous construction type guy. He was a finishing woodworker. Did a lot of the finish work in the city. He lived out on Long Island, but so I knew he was interested in woodworking. He had seen that cowpoke Charlie that I carved, and I noticed that there was a wood carving show or exhibit at the Valley Bank Concourse in downtown Phoenix. And just to get him off of my mother's nerves for a while, I asked him if he's interested in going down and see that carving show. And he said, sure. So off we go. We're walking around looking at the carvings, and they're all in cases under glass. It was a nice exhibit. He said, you ought to have your stuff in here. I said, what stuff? Well, that little cowboy you did. I said, well, yeah, but that's the only thing I've done. I mean, these guys, and I don't know what I'm doing. These guys know what they're doing. And he said, well, let me check into some things for you. So he goes over to the table where the show committee's sitting, and he says, how do you get your carvings in these boxes and stuff here? He says, and they asked him, well, are you a wood carver? And he said, no, but he says, my nephew here, he's better than any of you guys. He ought to be in there. And I got embarrassed when he said that. And I just kind of evaporated. I was gone. And about a half hour later, he comes outside, where you been? I says, well, I got a little warm in there. So I stepped outside. He says, well, look, I got all this paperwork for you. You need to go to join this club, these wood carvers. So at that time, the Arizona Woodcarvers Association required you to become a member. You had to be a wood carver. It wasn't like today. They weren't there to teach you how to carve. They were there to organize the wood carvers. So you had to already be a wood carver. So I had to come up with 3 wood carvings for them to evaluate for acceptance into the organization. And I was really nervous that I wouldn't make it in. So I spent a lot of time, and I was afraid that they would remember me or my uncle. So this was like from February till October when I finally got the nerve to go to a meeting. And with that, they said, oh, these are pretty good. What are you carving these with? And I told them about my X-Acto knives, and oh, well, you got to learn about some real tools, they would say. So,
right.
They started helping me in that regard. But along with the real tools came the real reality of learning how to get them sharp, which was something I had to deal with the X-Acto knives.
Right.
So it was, that was, I would guess, what got me started. In a nutshell. I was a pretty big nut, but that's what kind of got me started. When I had heard about, through the wood carving organization, about a bunch of wood carvers who would get together in July every year in Monument, Colorado. They had a place called the National Woodcarvers Museum. And Monument, Colorado is on the north edge of Colorado Springs. When I was in the service, I was stationed at Fort Carson, which is on the south end of Colorado Springs. Immediately to the north end of Colorado Springs is the Air Force Academy. And right abutting the Air Force Academy on the north side was the Carvers Museum. So I felt like I kind of knew the area, so to speak, and was interested in going up there. So I took the family and the kids, and we went up there. It lasted for 2 weeks, but we went up for 1 week. I used a vacation week. We went up there, got a motel room. That's back when motel rooms could, you could put a family in a motel for $20. If the motel didn't have a pool, you might get a discount on that. And the hotel we stayed in didn't have a pool. But I met this guy by the name of Steve Prescott. And I walked in and I saw his carvings and I thought, wow, look at these little cowboys. Those are cool. That's what I wanted to get better at. And in my eye, he was better than I was. So I was talking to him and he said, well, what do you carve? And I said, well, I try to carve the same thing, same subject as what you're doing. He said, well, let me see what you got. So I pulled him out and he liked what he saw, something about what I was doing. So we kind of instantly developed this little mutual admiration society, and we started picking each other's brain. And we would sit there and carve in this big circus tent. And Cleve Taylor was there, and Cleve was doing a class on carving a cowboy. So it was the second or third day I'd been there, and Steve comes looking for me, and I was in the class with Cleve. And Steve says, what you doing in here? I says, well, I'm going to carve this cowboy with Cleve. He says, well, what do you want to do that for? You should come out and carve with me. And I said, well, okay. So I got up and left class. And had no idea that I was rubbing Cleve the wrong way. But Cleve still says I never paid him for the class. It was all $5. And I'm sure I paid him. But if I didn't, that's okay. Because he won't let me pay him now, because then if I did that, he'd be able to tell me I never paid him. So, so I'm off the hook there. But I met some other carvers. I met Stu Martin up there at that time. Marilyn Calderon and Sharon Elliott and Dave Dunham, Rich Weatherby, Stu Martin, Larry Udis. All those guys were there. So there was like an international grouping of carvers. And I felt like that was the first time I had experienced wood carving outside of my local group.
And for those of you who don't know who Larry Udis is, he founded the International Carvers Congress, which is still an organization that's thriving and well. They meet in Bettendorf, Iowa yearly. Of course, due to COVID, they've had to cancel the last 2 years. Larry Udis, aka Big Dog, Larry Udis, he passed away just this past year, didn't he? Or was it 2 years ago now?
He did. Yeah, that's maybe I think 2 years now.
Yeah.
But he has done a lot for the world of wood carving.
It's true.
And and while I was up there, Steve was doing a video and asked if I would hang out with him while he did his video. And so our wives took the kids back to his motel because they had a pool and they were swimming. And when he got done with his video and we were driving back, I threw a thought at him that I had. It seemed to me, with my local group in particular and at the national level, that the bird carvers were a more elite group of carvers. Didn't matter if you were a good bird carver or a bad bird carver, you were a bird carver. And I guess because they have notoriety of the wood carving competition that they do in Maryland each year, and then they have there's a West Coast competition also that kind of leads up to that. There's a number of competitions around the country, but they seem to be more organized than any other subject group.
Right.
And on that hierarchy, that level of hierarchy, the bird carvers being up here, the caricature carvers were down here at the bottom. They were in the basement. If you can't do realistic, you just call it caricature and you're good to go. Didn't matter. And caricature, because I was interested in caricature as exaggerated realism, not the cartoon element so much, although there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's like being straight and gay. There's nothing wrong with that. It just doesn't happen to be cartooning just didn't happen to be my thing so much. But I was a big fan of Emil Janelle, and his stuff was real exaggerated realism almost to a fault. Even with clothes on, you could see the anatomy of the figure that was underneath. I mean, he could be wearing a suit coat, and you'd still on the back you would see the trapezius, or in the front you would see the pectorals and the chest muscles and the stomach. And he just had a way with depicting his figures that showed that he had an extensive knowledge of anatomy. And with any study of a master that I had done, they all seemed to find importance in, if they were doing human figure, they found importance in the anatomy. If you talk to anyone who is doing as an animal carver, they are very, very regimented toward the anatomy of the subject, whatever it is they're doing. So I always felt that anatomy was key to becoming better at what you were doing. The better you understand it, the better you can represent it in your subject, in your medium, whatever that might be. So
very true.
Studying the anatomy and studying the work of Janelle. In any case, I mentioned to Steve that I would like to see if there was anything we could do, nothing that I could do individually, but if we could get a group of good caricature carvers together to put on an exhibit of quality caricature, that maybe we could raise the public's perception of where we sit in that hierarchy of carving subjects. Move ourselves up closer to the level of the bird carvers. And so he was thinking about that, and we got back to the hotel and we talked about it some more. And it became, well, who would we include in a group of the quality? Who are the better caricature carvers? So based on the guys that he knew, and he's from Texas, and the people that I knew, and I'm from Arizona, but spent a lot of my time in California, Southwest and West Coast, and Steve more the central U.S. and Texas. But we started throwing names out, and we wrote them down. And we ended up with about 60 names on a list that either he knew or I knew or we knew through magazines like Chip Chats or The Mallet.
Yeah.
There were only 2 magazines at that time. So we put these names out there, and then we thought, well, if we're going to put a group together, who of these would we use? Do we use them all? Well, I don't know, he would say. You know, they had this thing going on in Arkansas, and this carving event that would last for a week just outside of Branson. And these two guys were involved in it. There were 4 or 5 guys involved in it, but these 2 guys in particular never seemed to get along with one another. So if there was a problem, one of these 2 guys was in the middle of it. And so I don't know if we ought to include them in a group. So we had to take those 60 names and find 15 or 20, however many we were going to have, that were compatible, that could get along. And then we thought, if we're going to organize a group, it would be nice to have somebody who had organizational skills.
Right.
So, because we're trying to organize this, and we realized right away that neither of us had organizational skills. I was working for a printing company, and Steve was a junior high school teacher. If anything, he probably had more organizational skills than I did, just because he had to come up with lesson plans and that sort of thing. But nonetheless, we decided that maybe we shouldn't start too big, start small and give ourselves room to grow. And this was before there was any kind of technology that we're using today. If we wanted to communicate with these people, we had to send them a letter. And sending a letter was no big deal, because postage back then was a lot less than it is now. But nonetheless, when you send out 20 letters, the postage starts to add up. And then if the letter isn't going to get it done, you've got to make a phone call. Now you've got a long distance phone call. And you're spending big money, and it depends on how long you're on the phone. It isn't like today where you got a data plan. You can call anywhere in the world now, and it's not going to raise the cost of your phone bill. And that just didn't exist back in the day when we were trying to start this. So I'm talking 1988, 89. So we put a letter together. Steve invited me to come to a wood carving show in Denver City, Texas, which is about halfway between he and I. It's West Texas, oil country, Cap Rock. It's desolate. There's nothing out there but oil wells and creosote bushes. And the guys that lived there and had that Denver City show, Denver City is about 80 miles north of Odessa. So it's like on the upper end of the Panhandle on the New Mexico border.
Sure.
So yeah, out in the middle of nowhere. And an interesting place to be. And the guys that lived and worked there, were the wood carvers there, were some of the most interesting guys I've ever met. Totally incorrect politically, racially, any other way you can mention. They just told it like they felt it. They were dyed in the wool Confederate, and everything that's wrong today
they represented
was fair game then,
right?
And probably still is
for them, sure.
But some of the funniest stories I've ever known came out of there. One guy, these guys worked the oil fields, okay? So there was this oil well that was about 90 miles out. It took all day to get out to it and back. And they didn't like to go out there. That was the worst part of their job, was having to go out to that oil well.
Mm.
So one of the guys that worked with him was a fan of archaeology, Indian pots and that sort of thing. He was always looking for pottery. And so they told him that, and I'm not going to mention any names because some of these guys are still alive, but they told him that that they had seen some pottery out there by that old well. He says, well, when it comes time to go out there, let me know. He says, I'll do it. So it's like a 3.5, 4 hour drive out to that oil well, and then whatever you got to do, and then drive back. So it was all day. So they told him where they'd seen the pottery. So he goes out there and he finds some of this pottery, and he collects it and brings it back and starts trying to fit the pieces back together. And every time there was a rain, more pottery would show up. And so after a rainstorm, he was out there going after more pottery. So he had put together a large Indian pot, ancient Indian pot. It reconstructed it, glued it all back together, had a glass display case built for it, a nice oak pedestal, put it in his foyer when you walk in the front door. That's the first thing you see. Had special lighting put in to light it. It was beautiful.
Cool.
But there was one piece of that pot he never found, and it was in the bottom. And the reason he figured he didn't find it is because oftentimes when they're going to throw out a pot, they something about a kill hole or something. They put a hole in the bottom of it so it'll never be used again. And that was the piece he never found. But that was the piece that said "Made in Mexico," Hecho en Mexico. So these guys had set him up. The newspaper came out and did an article about him and photographed it and the whole nine yards. But he would have, if he ever found out that they'd salted that pot out there for him, they would have killed him.
Amazing.
They would have killed him. So that's the kind of stuff that I was. God, there's so many cool stories like that.
It reminds me of traveling.
A lot of them we can't even tell.
What's that?
A lot of the stories I couldn't even tell you because
I'm sure
wouldn't be for public.
In Athens, Greece, by the Acropolis, there are artifacts, and of course, everywhere you're an ancient ruin site. And if you walk the grounds, you'll see pottery, handles of old pots. And as a little kid, I was there, probably 9 years old, and I was finding these pieces, and I'd find them, and as quickly as possible, I'd put them in my little bag, and of course they'd have people stationed in towers, and they'd see you and they'd yell at you, but they'd never enforce the rules. They'd only just yell at you, right? And that was it. And you just kind of like pretend nothing happened and kept the piece. It was only, I don't know, it was maybe 5 or 6 or more years later that I found out that those were all planted. That was all a scheme to keep little kids like me interested in ancient Greek history. So they were actually, making these artifacts and scattering them about the grounds, and then yelling at kids for stealing them as part of the fair for tourists. So.
Now, see, this is new. I didn't know you were Greek.
Yeah. So on my mom's side, so she's 100%. Actually, our genetic results came in a couple of weeks ago. It was my brother's birthday present, or Christmas present, to my parents, and found out my mom is Southern Islander Greek. She was 100% Greek. So on her side, yeah. And then my father, a number of other things, he's like Swiss but yeah. So because of my dad's hodgepodge, his Heinz 57 heritage, he just kind of identifies as American. So the Greek part culturally took over, and so I identify as more Greek than anything else. My mother being born there.
That's cool. That's cool.
Pretty funny. So then the CCA. So it really started out of you and Steven kind of looking for folks who were kind of in your wheelhouse, or maybe you were fans of, and you kind of pieced this group of people together. And how then did you resolve the issue of getting a hold of these guys? And were you able to get a hold of them? And you held these meetings, or what exactly was the?
I digressed a little bit, but when we were in Texas, West Texas, Steve invited me. He says, "Why don't you come to my house?" And I said, "Well, what do I want to do that for?" I said, "That's going to take me, half again further away from Phoenix which is where I was headed after the show." And he said, "Well, if you got some time," he says, "I'll introduce you to some other carvers that you haven't met yet." I said, "Oh, well, who would that be?" And he said, "Well, there's Claude Bolton and Jack Price and Dave Dunham. You already know him. And then there's Chris Hammock. I'll introduce you to Chris, and Gary Batt." And then he says, "And then we'll go see Gene Zesh." And it's like, wow, these are some cool names. I'll take him up on that offer. So we went back through Odessa. We had a tent trailer that we were staying in. So we were going to do some camping after that West Texas show. So I left the tent trailer at his brother's house in Odessa, and then we went back to Fort Worth. So we're going to go down and meet Gary Batt and Gene Zesh in Mason, Texas. So Mason, Texas. Okay, so how far can that be? He said, "Oh, a couple hours." I said, "Okay." Well, it turns out Mason, Texas is actually about 4 hours from Fort Worth. Texas is a big state.
I guess so.
So we're headed down to Mason, Texas. Steve is driving, and I've got a notepad, and we're putting a letter together to send out to 15 other guys, or not 15 other guys. We came up with a list of 15 names.
Right.
So we only have to send out 13 letters because his name and my name are on the list.
Right.
Of all the names on that list, 2 that didn't belong there were Steve Prescott and Dave Stetson. We had no way in hell our name should have been in that group of people. But if we're going to put this together, we're going to be a part of it. So we nominated ourselves right off the bat. Right. So we're putting this letter together, and we sent it out. I still, in a file folder, have that original letter that started the whole thing. But we typed it up, and we mailed it out to 13 individuals, and we got 12 positive responses.
Nice.
The only one who didn't feel like he had the time to put into it at then was Chris, who is now a member. But at that time, he was too busy with other things, and didn't feel like he had the time to devote to an organization like that. So, but we started off with 15, and we set the maximum number at 25, because if you got to write a letter to everybody or make phone calls, the more people you have involved in it, the more expensive it's going to get.
Right.
And we had to start this by reaching into our back pockets and pulling out $100 each to have some seed money to take care of postage and right. Whatever it was we needed to do. So for the first 5 years, we were all donating $100 each every year to keep this organization floating. But then we started to realize that we could use our talents to raise a little bit of money to create the seed money that we needed. Instead, what we were doing is getting involved with Silver Dollar City in Branson, Missouri. Yeah. And they had a a foundation that they supported. So we jumped on board with them and did a fundraiser to raise money for the foundation that Silver Dollar City supported. And I said, charity needs to start at home. We're giving our money that we're making to Silver Dollar City's charitable foundation, which is fine. Then we got to turn around and pull money out of our own pocket to come up. So we've got enough money to give the secretary to mail out letters and to cover postage and stamps and printer ink and whatever else it is he has to come up with. It gets expensive. It adds up. So we started doing some things to raise money for ourselves, and that's kind of the way we've kept the organization going. But it just we gave it some direction. We got together at Paxton's lumber store because they let us use the warehouse to sit down and talk about coming up with some bylaws for the organization. And the original guys, there were 11 of the 15 showed up for the first meeting. And we came up with the bylaws that we're still using today. And it's just been like a team of wild horses running crazy, and we're just kind of constantly pulling on the reins to keep them under control. But it's been a good thing. It's been a good thing for the carving community and in particular caricature carving.
Yeah.
And it's been a good thing for us, and we've totally enjoyed it. And
there aren't enough of these types of organizations in wood carving, and I think others could really follow suit and do what you guys have done, and it would really benefit the carving community to certainly build organizations around around carving. There's got to be incentive for artists, competition. We have to have more artists showing up for sure, and I think that's what CCA does is it encourages folks to show their work and to not only compete but just participate in being a part of something larger than themselves, and that is so significant in creative endeavors. Just that social element, the ability to interact with another artist who has a like mind and cares about the same seemingly esoteric stuff to the outside world. So that's cool.
One of the cool things about wood carving, and it could be said for any form of art, is that artists kind of, you use the term artist, and wood carvers, a lot of them don't want to consider themselves artists.
Yeah.
And some of them aren't. I would say probably the vast majority of wood carvers are more what you would call a hobbyist.
Right.
That would be one of the nicer terms I would use. But
right.
But those individuals who are trying to take it to the artistic level that it can be taken to, are kind of paving the road for those hobbyists that are following along. And I think we can work together and need to work together, or it's going to become a lost art.
Yes.
There are too many artistic mediums. I can think of only one artistic medium that is more difficult than wood carving, and that would be stone sculpting. I've done that. It's slower, more manually involved, unless you want to get into pneumatic chisels and stuff that will speed it up a little bit. But wood carving is probably the more difficult of the
Yep.
artistic medium to work with.
Yep.
There's other ways to express yourself easier. And the society that we live in today, because of the social mediums that we're using, the computers and the technology that's available,
Right.
is more interesting. People might go to like a reenactment of a turn of the century. I'm talking turn of the century, 18 to 1900s, you know, or places like Plymouth Plantation or Silver Dollar City, and to see how things used to be done by hand in the old days. And people are interested in that, interested in seeing it,
Right.
but to actually get their hands involved in it is something that they kind of tend to go, well, why? Why would I do that? Why carving, for example? Why take the time and effort to use a chisel and mallet to cut wood when you can get a CNC machine to do it for you?
Right.
And you know, I went to we have the woodcraft shop in Tempe here locally, does a parking lot exhibit show. They have the wood carvers and the wood turners and the fine woodworkers, and everybody's set up in the parking lot doing their thing. And it's a you know, to create interest, and all the manufacturers have show specials and that sort of thing. But one of the things that seems to garner the most interest is the guy who's over there selling a CNC machine that is so time consuming. It takes so long for these little cutters to create the profile that they're looking for. Hell, you and I could do it in a fraction of the time that it takes a CNC machine to do it.
Right.
And in your case, it would look better. So,
Oh, good one. No way.
But
question for you to follow up a couple of things. Sorry to interrupt you. How then do you classify yourself? Do you call yourself a carver? Do you call yourself an artist? If you're on an airplane and someone asks you what you do you introduce the teacher part of what you?
That's it right there. When you're on the airplane, somebody says what you do. I'm a wood sculptor.
Yeah. There you go. Okay, and the other question, and feel free to elaborate on the first a little bit more if you'd like, but is maybe when you think of people who are currently active in carving in the in the community, who are some of those who you'd like to kind of highlight, or maybe someone that comes to mind who is kind of pushing those limits for folks to look into, maybe artistically, as inspiration for others, if any come to mind at all?
Wow, yeah, the people that I look up to, people that I would classify as the leaders of the carving movement today would be Fred Cogilo.
For sure.
Neil Cox.
Mm-hmm.
My brain goes blank when I start coming up with names.
Those are good ones.
Yeah, another guy from Canada.
Fred Zavadil.
Yes, Fred. Fred Zavadil, just amazing.
Yeah.
Janet Denton Cordell.
Yeah, for sure.
These are folks in their own right that I put at the top of the ladder.
Yeah.
All of whom I know personally, even though I can't come up with their name.
I know that feeling.
Uh,
It's awesome.
no, Fred and his wife Hannah, I would run into them each year at the big Dayton show, and yeah, one of the highlights of my life was to be sitting at my table in Dayton, Ohio, at the show in Wilmington.
Yeah.
I was sitting there and I heard a couple of people talking, and I wasn't paying attention. I was carving. I was sitting there carving, so I was looking down in my lap, and I thought, well, who the hell is this that seems to think they know what they're looking at? And so I picked my head up to look, and here's Neil Cox and Fred Zavadil standing in front of my table discussing my work. And it's like, wow, it blew me away that
Mind blown. Yeah.
these guys would take the time to stop and look at my stuff.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Do you have any recommended maybe books or like any works of any authors in carving who you recommend to young people starting out, or young and old people, but folks young in carving, available today?
There's a book called Caricature Carving from Head to Toe.
Yeah.
Photography by Roger Schroeder, and it was written by Dave Stetson.
Okay, how do you spell the last name on that?
Stetson. Fox Chapel. It should have been redone a dozen times since it came out, and each time that I have sat down to attempt to redo it, it seemed to me that it was going to be a waste of time, because I still feel like I'm on this path that I'm moving down the road. And if I take a snapshot, which would be a book of where I'm at any given time, by the time they print the book, I've already moved beyond that.
Yeah.
Yep. When my book came out, one of the biggest criticisms I would have was in teaching a class. Someone would come up and say, well, would you mind signing my book? And I said, no problem. So I put a nice little thing in there and hand the book back to them, and they'd say, now, what you were telling us doesn't seem to be what I was reading in the book.
Yep.
It's like, well, because that was 2 years ago, and I've moved on. I'm not doing it that way now. Oh, well, gee, I kind of wasted my money buying this book, because this isn't up to date. This isn't what it. It's like, yeah, I get where you're coming from, but it's it's the way it is. If we're going to move on, you don't want to be stuck in a hole, because I've seen it happen to too many folks who become somewhat satisfied with where they're at, and they never move beyond that.
Yeah.
If anything, they regress a little bit.
Yeah.
Until they become too frail to carve anymore, or they die. Right. So, I don't ever want to get into that situation where I'm stuck there.
Right.
There's always the hill's constantly going up.
Yeah.
I don't ever want to be at the top of that hill. I want to keep pushing that.
Yeah.
Push rock up the hill like Sisyphus.
There you go. Yeah. Get some mythology in there. I appreciate that.
I just keep. You want to keep moving. Keep trying to improve. Each time you do something, you want to do it again. You want to do it differently in some way, or if not differently, at least better.
Right.
Than the one you've done before. But you get done with something and you look at it and you go, wow, that's better than I've ever done before.
Right.
I better just quit while I'm ahead.
Right.
Well, no, don't quit. Keep going. Drive yourself to do again. Only do it even. If you could do it better this time, you can do it even better than that the next time.
Right.
There's always that room for improvement. There's always that room for advancement.
Yeah.
And it might not even be moving on the same path. You may venture off onto another path,
Right.
and take another whole approach to something,
Right.
and completely change it.
Yeah, it's like the artistic benefit of having a touch of ADD. You and I have talked about this before, and as a kid, I was, I don't know the correct term, psychoanalyzed, and they determined that I was what they called borderline ADHD, right? So basically means I didn't sit in one spot at any given moment. You've probably noticed even from watching this, I'm constantly fidgeting, right? I'm a fidgeter. So, we've talked about your non-formal diagnosis and not of ADHD, but just ADD, having distractibility, and we've talked about how that really has been an asset in some ways for us, pointing us into new creative territories, maybe new directions we wouldn't otherwise venture in. That distractibility can lead you down other sub-genres within the niche of carving that can definitely add to your work. I know for me, it's like genre hopping, interest in other things, painting, for instance, portraiture, portrait painting, that is, photography, within the creative fields. You having those creative, the background that you do have in those other creative endeavors, it kind of adds to the work that you do, I think, in some way. Wouldn't you say? Yeah.
Yeah. When I used to do a report for school, and I'd go to the library, pull out the encyclopedias to look something up, I would get distracted by something else that caught my eye before I got to whatever it was I was looking up.
Totally.
Yeah. I'd end up coming home with a book on magic or something, that had nothing to do with settling the Louisiana Purchase or something, that I was supposed to be doing in Florida. But that's been my life. I have got the tremendous advantage of having 1,000 square feet here around me that is full of all kinds of stuff that in some way has something to do with wood carving, though not really,
Right.
I spent the last 2 days roughing out bowl blanks for my lathe. And I got some of the most beautiful wood that grows locally, that when we can get a good piece of it, fresh cut, it's like a little gold mine. And I roughed out a bowl of olive, but I roughed it out thick so I could let it dry slow. And I didn't get the sealer on the inside of the bowl before I got distracted and started doing something else.
Yeah.
And it's all cracked and wasted on me.
Gosh.
And that was a whole afternoon of work totally wasted. By the next morning when I came out and saw it sitting on the table with all these splits in it, and it's like, oh geez, I didn't get the sealer on it.
That's a bummer.
So, but I mean, they're just, it's a mess. There's clay models, there's half done, 3/4 done carvings, there's class pieces that I'm still working on.
For sure.
There's an arc behind my head that's under construction.
Yeah.
With 30, 40 little guys working on it.
Right.
And really haven't got started on the animals yet. It's just the guys building the ark. So
right.
In
terms of a routine, then, is that something that you found is helpful? Is there like maybe a practice that you found, or a regular time slot, or some sort of way of reining in the creative juices for yourself? How does that work for you? What have you found?
That would be such a great idea to follow up on. Man, if I had a route, wow. You know, I, I don't want to use this as an excuse, but for the last 11 years now, I've been a caregiver to my wife, Michelle.
Mm.
She had a stroke.
Mm.
And what happens when a loved one like that has a stroke, life stops. Just completely stops. The world and life as you knew it no longer exists from that point forward.
Hmm.
And it takes you all of about a couple of trips to the hospital to realize where you're at, and that you've got to find a new direction. You've got to find a new way to do the things that you used to enjoy doing. Yeah. Some of them you can continue to do, and some of them you can't. And my life prior to her having the stroke was organized by her. Mm. She would tell me what to do and what to work on, and keep me organized and take care of the business aspects of everything. I can't do that now. I can't rely on her to tell me what to do. I've got to figure it out for myself. The biggest thing, the hardest obstacle for me to learn was how to take care of myself. Because I hadn't done that. My entire life up until 11 years ago, someone had been taking care of me. And I had to learn how to take care of myself and learn how to take care of them. And so ask anyone who is unmarried, probably yourself, for example. If you're living alone, you don't have your mother to clean up after you and do your laundry and cook your meals, and you have to do all of that. I have to do that for myself and for her, and keep the house clean and all the things that go along with that. So my carving time got cut from about 16, 18 hours a day, cut down to maybe 2 or 3. For the first 6 months, I did no curving whatsoever after she had her stroke. And I've worked it back up. So I can get about 3 or 4 hours a day in now, but not all at one time. I'll come out and I'll do it for an hour or two. I'll go back, check on her, make sure she's okay. If she needs anything, then I come out here. And while I'm working out here on an idea or something new coming up, at the same time, I'm in the back of my mind thinking about, well, what are we going to have for dinner tonight? Do I have to get it out of the freezer? Do I have to run to the store? What are we even going to have? Last night, I didn't think about it soon enough. I got caught up in taking care of some bowl blanks. And so I had to run out and get some Mexican food to go. So, but that was easy. That was good. But I mean, that's the way my routine is now. It doesn't, I can't get caught up in a routine.
Right.
I get most of everything done regarding the housework in the first couple hours after I get up in the morning. You know, if there's laundry to do, I've got it in the washer, and then that takes about 45 minutes, and then takes another 45 minutes in the dryer, and then fold them up and putting them away. I mean, that's just a routine that happens apart from wood carving.
Right.
But it's something I have to do, or I'd be out here carving naked. which brings up another whole story. UPS guy used to come in and deliver packages right into the shop. He'd come around the house and bring them right in. So, because we were mostly always out here, and it gets kind of warm out here in the summertime. So I had an apron on, and I had taken off my T-shirt, and just screwing around, I took off my shorts. So all I had was my apron on, and I was just curious to find out how long it would take Michelle to realize that I was standing out here carving naked with nothing on but an apron. And she hadn't noticed. Next thing I know, the UPS guy walks in the door.
Oh gosh.
And when he walked in, I turned to face him so he wouldn't see my bare butts in the back. And that's when Michelle noticed me.
Perfect.
She started to lose it. She was cracking up, and I'm nervous as hell because the UPS guy's there. So I signed for the packages and sent him on his way. So our email address, we at the same at about that time we were trying to come up with an email address.
Right.
And she wanted to use her name Michelle with one L. And it had already been taken and used. So I had to contribute something to it. So our email address is LCN which is Let's Carve Naked.
Oh gosh, that's perfect. The secret is out now.
Yeah.
You heard it here. You heard it here first. So
it's not really a secret. There's people that are already aware of that. But
there you go.
Yeah, it's a crazy world.
That's perfect for getting the pants off and the FedEx.
That's what happens in warmer climates.
Yeah, right. Stuff that can happen to you in warmer climates.
We've got a nice hedge of oleanders around the pool, so we can just go out and hop in the pool to cool off in the summertime, and
oh man,
just take a towel off, and come back in and go back to carving. So
that's beautiful.
Sometimes there's at no time. I don't think I put a swimsuit on for 5 years.
Why would you? You have that privacy.
No reason.
Beautiful. Okay, so this would be an appropriate time to introduce a few rapid fire questions, I call them, and totally blatantly stole them from not the questions themselves, but the idea from Tim Ferriss. So he has a great podcast worth checking out if you haven't heard of it. It's called The Tim Ferriss Show. But rapid fire questions don't have to be rapid answers, as you would say. These are just kind of topical or light questions. The first one might be a little bit more intense, and it's the question is, what pisses you off?
Wow. People that abuse their pets.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pets are totally defenseless.
Right.
Totally reliant on us.
Right.
And that pisses me off more than anything I can think of.
It's a good one. What is the best purchase you've made under $100?
Best purchase I've made under $100. A box full of clay. Yeah. Clay, because you can mold it and form it and bend it to your will. And I use it more and more the further along I go. It saves me wasting a lot of good wood.
Yeah, sure.
I use the same piece over and over again. I'll take a clay piece and bend it and mold it and measure it to see if it's going to fit within the parameters of the block of wood that I'm going to put it in.
Right.
Yeah, clay, because
good clay.
A 50-pound box of clay was under $100.
Yeah.
Including shipping. And it's oil-based clay, so and I'm still using it. I've
Wow.
had it for 20 plus years.
An oil-based clay. Do you know if
Yeah.
there are any modern equivalents to the product that you have currently that you recommend, or is
Yeah,
that something its
it's
own?
plastiline. Plastiline.
Plastic.
Um, in that book I told you about, character carving from head to toe.
Yeah.
I use a product by Chavant
Okay.
called the Bouquet, and it's a high melt clay. So in the heat that we have here, if I happen to have the air conditioning turned off, it can get warm here in the studio,
Right.
and regular oil-based clay will just kind of flop and
Right.
fall apart.
Right.
Uh, this is high melt, so it holds up pretty well.
Right.
You can get it 2 pound blocks at art supply stores. You can probably even find it at Michael's or Hobby Lobby, or you can buy it on Amazon.
Mm.
It's by Chavant. It's called the Beau Touche.
Awesome.
It's a beautiful.
What is your favorite pizza topping?
Wow. Does cheese count as a topping?
Sure.
Because it wouldn't be pizza without cheese on it.
That's true.
But I like just about everything. I would not put ham and pineapple on a pizza.
Really?
Yeah.
What about pineapple and bacon?
No.
Wouldn't
No
go.
pineapple on it.
Okay.
I like pineapple, but not on my pizza.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
No.
Very good. What is a belief that you hold that not many people hold onto, or many people do?
Belief. Wow. Are we talking religious belief here?
No, it can be a conviction about, about
I
art.
believe that. Okay. Well, no. Here you go. Our hands are controlled by our mind, and the mind tells the hands what to do. If this finger's moving, it's because my brain is saying,
Yeah.
I want that to move. If I develop Alzheimer's and I get a shake, it's happening in my brain.
Right.
There's something in my brain that's causing that tremor. Okay. I had a friend who had Parkinson's, and he would shake like a leaf, and they put an implant, an electrode in his brain, and it was run from a battery, that device that was under the skin, so he didn't have to mess with it. But it caused his right hand to completely stop shaking.
Wow.
So every time there was a tremor, the electrode did something that stimulated his brain to counteract that. So they've got that sort of thing kind of figured out.
Right.
He did not go to get the implant on the other side for the other hand, because this was an operation that required him to be awake throughout the process.
Right.
And he didn't want to go through that again. But yeah, the brain controls the hand, so it's all about what's in here. Had a student in class who was a retired from the CIA. He worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, and the last 10 years of his service was working with Scotland Yard. And they were studying palm prints, the lines in your palm. Those lines are imprinted before we're born. It's not, those lines don't form because we open and close our hands a lot. Those are already there at birth.
Right.
They form at the same time as our brain is forming as a fetus in our mother's womb. And they were studying the palm prints of criminals to see what tendencies they may already have that causes them to be a criminal. And he said, I tell you what, people don't, do you believe in palm readers? And I was like, yeah, no, not really. And he said, would you like me to read your palm? I said, sure. He looked at my palm and he started talking, and I almost immediately pulled my hand away. It's like, how do you know that? I said, my wife doesn't know that. He said, well, let me read her palm. Same thing. He said, it's already there. Tendencies. It's tendencies. It's what's already in your brain. You have natural tendencies to react or do a certain thing. And whether you act on it or don't act on it has a lot to do with your upbringing and how socially acceptable you become.
Right.
But he said, it's already there. It's imprinted in our palms.
Interesting.
And I became a believer.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was really, really strange. So yeah, you can go on Google palmistry and the lines in the hand and what some of them mean. They can tell about how long you may live. This line that comes across the palm here, there's two major lines here. If there's a single crease across there, if those two lines meet, it's called a simian crease. Every child born with Down syndrome has a simian crease, a single line across the palm.
Interesting.
Now, not everyone with a simian crease has Down syndrome, but everyone with Down syndrome has a simian crease. So in the neonatal part of the hospital, when babies are born, they'll look at their palms and they'll see if they have a simian crease. They'll check them for Down syndrome.
Interesting.
If there's no simian crease, they don't need to check them.
Wow.
Doesn't mean they'll have Down syndrome, but it's yeah. I mean, there's things about us and the world around us that are just totally blow me away. The things that's to me the greatest part of being an artist is the research that goes into the subjects that we create, because that research increases our knowledge, and it's things that, the older I get, the more I want to know. It's like, if I'd had this curiosity when I was a kid, I could have become a Leonardo da Vinci.
This leads me to a question, and maybe he
started his thought process that made him the scientist and inventor that he was at a very early age. And most of us don't have that curiosity factor at that age.
So if you could go back to yourself. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I think with like yourself, it kicked in earlier for you than it did for me.
Oh, I don't know. What would you, going back to your 25-year-old self, or 20-year-old self or whatever, what would you say to him? What advice, if any, would you have for him?
Wow. Stay in the service. You would have had a better program. Being a wood carver is not a way to retire and earn a good living. Yeah.
I tell that to people when we talk about business of carving, that if you're in carving just for to sell your work, you're in the wrong career. So if that's what you're doing.
No, you better have a little money in the bank before you become an artist.
Yeah, there you go.
That is if you want to pay the bills, if you want to raise a family.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
So a time that you've laughed the hardest is our concluding question, then we can wrap things up.
Wow. It's always been my kids when they were young that had me laughing the hardest.
How many kids do you have?
I have 3.
Okay.
I have 3, but they're all adults now.
Yeah.
They're getting close to the age where they're going to have to start taking care of me, or put me in a home.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know when that will happen, but it with everything else, life is exponentially advancing on me. Year by year goes by faster and faster, and I'm afraid that age when I have to be cared for was going to sneak up on me and bite me in the ass before I realize it's there. So yeah, I'm trying to make the most of every day I can. So yeah, if I just decide that I'm lazy today, I don't want to do anything, I feel real guilty about that. On the next day. On the next day.
Exactly. There you go. Well, Dave, it has been a pleasure to talk with you, and I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the time chatting. And if folks want to learn more about what you do, as I said, they can go on the CCA's website. Any other way that they can contact you to find out more about your workshops or your work in general, your book?
No, that's about it. Facebook is where I put most of my stuff now. Awesome. Facebook, I'm trying to learn about Instagram and doing some videos, and but so far I've been doing most all of it on my Facebook page. Awesome. So I've given up trying to maintain a website and spending the money every year to keep a website up and running that I wasn't using, that wasn't getting visited that often. So I let that go. Right. But yeah, that's it. So
and on Facebook, maybe he'll add you as a friend if you're lucky. Thank you again, Dave. Appreciate your time, and have a good one.
It was good, Alex. Take care, buddy.
That was so good.